Welcome to the Overpowered podcast, a podcast where we talk to the creators across the internet about the amazing things that they create. And today I have the super scribe of super comics, the word weaver of story seekers. I am pleased to meet Jim Krueger. Jim, how are you?
I'm so good. I love that word weaver.
You're a word weaver, aren't you? That's
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
The weaver of the words. It sounds mystical, and I mean, it adds a little bit of fantasy to everything that you do, which a lot of that involves a lot of fiction.
Web in there too. That's making me sad, but
Oh no, we got to have that emotion in there, right?
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, man. So how have things been for you?
Things are crazy. It's like we're all living in this crazy time, and I'm not sure I'm not sure if you go Dickensian or no, it's not Dickensian. What am I saying? I'm not sure if it's like the best of times, worst of times. It's the worst of times, and there are some good times in the midst of it. So
For sure.
yeah,
Feast and famine. I've heard people say.
yeah. But, those of us who have health, that's lucky. That's really lucky. So
For those of you who don't know who Jim is a very prolific writer from all the way across Marvel Comics, DC Comics, pretty much every comic publisher there is out there. You've written something for them, including your own original works. So just a brief rundown, you did Earth X, which I think was the big, huge one for Marvel, which got you started, and then Justice for DC, but you've also written on things like Star Wars, Batman Avengers, the Foot Soldiers, which is your own original property, correct?
yeah, that was really my first real big thing out there that started to make a name for me.
Amazing. The runner, the last straw man, you've got just an endless amount of things on your resume. So one of the things that got you started in Marvel was, say, Earth X, that was your first big published work that people usually know. I know there's a whole huge story of how you got into Marvel and how that all started. But one of the things that really caught my attention there was that you kept most of the origin stories there intact of a lot of the heroes. So we want to know, what is Jim Krueger's origin story?
Oh, well, there's probably a bunch of key moments to it. I would say, if and I swear, when I start out by saying when I was 6 years old, this isn't going to be a year by year, blow by blow thing. But this is probably, if it's not, it probably is my secret origin story. It really is. When I was 6 years old and my brother was 4, my dad was this workaholic, but he bought me comic books and stuff like that. So even my relationship with comic books is like, it's my dad, it's nostalgia, it's childhood, it's all that stuff. Anyhow, my mom pressured him and said, "You're going to miss your children growing up. We need to take a family trip." And so this was like Wisconsin, Brookfield, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And so we hopped on a train and took a train down to Florida, down to Disney World. And it was like sleeping compartments. It was like a big deal. It was a big mecca to Disney World. And on the way down, about halfway down, Florida got hit by a hurricane. And so my mom was saying things like, don't worry, I'm sure there are things you can do inside at Disney World. And my dad was saying, when I was in the military, the weather changes really quickly in Florida. Don't worry, we'll be fine. But meanwhile, on our way down, there was this terrible storm. And ironically, for the trip, my dad bought my brother a Batman comic and me a Superman comic. But we can talk about that part later. That's not even part of the origin. But we get there, and then, we got those orange, ponchos, and it's pouring out. And my dad says, something along the lines of, the weather's supposed to change, don't worry, it's bad now, but it won't always be bad. But there we are outside, Disney World, and we're getting soaked, ponchos aside. So you go in, and the way Disney World works is there's a train that goes around the outside of it, and you have to go almost through this. As a kid, it seems like a long tunnel, but it's really not. But it seems like a long tunnel. And you come out on the other side, and you're on Main Street, and you can see the castle and everything. Well, in the time of entering that tunnel and coming out on the other side, the hurricane really did break. And so we entered the tunnel coming from darkness, coming from storm. And when we came out on the other side, you had these shafts of light shooting down through the clouds as the sun was coming out, and you could see the castle reflected in the puddles of water that were already evaporating, and it was like entering literally a new world. And my dad looked down at me and said, "Now you know why they call it the Magic Kingdom." And I swear he fucked me up for life in that moment. like I couldn't believe it. And even now, when I look at how I tell stories, like I always tell stories of hope, but there's generally a lot of darkness and tunnel and storm before you get to that hope. So I think that's my deeper origin-ish, or at least a big part of it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the beginning of sort of moving you into that sort of world of wanting to see something new, but also, hope and coming out of darkness, which gives it more weight. And the value of that light once you have it, because you've been through the darkness, and you can, appreciate it more, I guess, because you know what the other side of that looks like.
Yeah, totally. And, everything is a journey. All stories have those elements in them.
For sure. For sure. So a little bit, fast forwarding a little bit. So after college, you started working in marketing, of all things.
It was advertising. I was a copywriter. I was good at puns and, words and all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I worked in advertising. I worked for a advertising agency in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And my clients were things like, the Sheboygan coho fishing tournament, and
Sure.
Things like silo unloaders, because it's very agricultural. Teat dip. I wrote a lot of ads for Teat dip, which is
I saw that on your Wikipedia page. I was going to ask you about that.
Before you milk them. Yeah. The great days.
In hindsight, I'm sure that looks pretty strange. Sort of from teat dip to writing these monstrous books.
It was like when I would talk to farmers and people in the agricultural industry, they would say, "Yeah, teat dip is teat dip," but my job was to make this teat dip special. And
Sure.
So, I did this whole, it's the hands down favorite of bovine everywhere, and all that kind of thing. And it was ridiculous, happy cows make happy milk, stuff like that.
So was that an industry that you, like, while you were in college, is that something you were looking at doing, was advertising, or did you just sort of fall into it?
Yeah, as a copywriter, I was, and that was right at the time I was really getting into comics. Like I'd been raised with it. I would get a comic here, an issue here, maybe a mini series here. But that was the point where I was reading like Alan Moore Swamp Thing, and Alan Moore Miracle Man, and Alan Moore Captain Britain. And then, it was also in the midst of all the greatness that Marvel had been doing. I mean, you had Frank Miller's Daredevil, and then his Dark Knight. You had, Simonson Thor, and Claremont and Burns X-Men, and then Burns Fantastic Four. And it was like that's still the greatest era of comics ever, that I think.
Oh, for sure. That was a huge shift in tone and influence
in
society.
It was like the promise of everything that Stan and Jack and Steve and all those guys did. It was a promise and the destiny of all the stories they began.
For sure. One of the pages I read online, it was a little biography about you. It said that some of the advertising agencies you had been with, that you worked on some of the Got Milk.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked on, I think, well, there's a lot of stuff in my career that I haven't gotten credit for. The whole Happy Milk, or I don't even remember the campaign, or Happy Cows campaign, like that started with me. And I remember, and it's almost even embarrassing now because I'm like, oh, what was I doing? What was I saying? But there was this giant advertising thing that would be put in like high school. There was like these high school mats that would be on the floor to remind kids to drink milk. And I think my big campaign was to show this giant cow, like you'd be stepping over this giant cow in line to get your food. And it says, I think my line was, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for 67 cents? you know?
That's good.
No, it's terrible.
Well, I mean, you must have written something right because you got several awards for your advertising.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. It was definitely fun, and I liked it. But at the same time, I really like, you would get these jobs, and these jobs would be really
Mhm.
special jobs. And some of the jobs that like this Sheboygan fishing tournament was really awesome because it's such a family town and it's such a family event. But like, you'd be driving into town and there'd be this big billboard that says keep your fly open for 3 days in August,
Hmm.
or hang out with the local hookers. you know and it was the stuff where I was always trying to push something,
Mhm.
you know because I felt like the audience wanted to laugh and wanted to be
Right.
surprised and shocked.
Well,
And so it was good, but at the same time, if in a given year or a given month I was given a chance to work on those campaigns, that would be like 3 or 4 days out of a month, and the rest of the month would be like catalog copy.
hmm.
Which, if I'm writing catalog copy, I'd rather be doing it for Marvel than for agricultural products.
Sure, sure. Well, you were able to use your advertising skills and able to get yourself, well, you sort of, you lobbied yourself for a job at Marvel
I
using your
did.
advertising skills.
I did. This was still the Midwest, but I went down to the Chicago Comic Con, met one of their marketing guys,
Mhm.
advertising guys, became instant friends with him. He said, look, we're and his name's Jeffrey Simons, and he's been like one of the most helpful people, because of that first step was all because of him, because he lobbied for me to a degree. And he said, look, our department's growing, all that sort of thing. I would love to, send your portfolio in. Let me know when you're sending it, and I'll make sure that someone here in our department sees it. And so I did like 6-piece mailing for myself, and every 3 or 4 days sent out a different mailing, and one of them was my portfolio. Um, and and ultimately, after a couple weeks, after all the mailings came through, I made a call, and they're like, look, we love it, the department's growing, are you willing to move to New York, all that kind of thing. And of course all my answers were yes, and they were like, well, we'll try to send the portfolio back to you. And I said, well, how about this, how about I come out there so you can meet me personally, and I'll pick up my
Mhm.
portfolio. And they said, okay. And like, from the point of me sending the first ad out that I did for myself, um, which was, I did these cards that opened up, and on the front of it, I had a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man swinging, and I took white out to the word balloon, so there'd be nothing there, just the empty word balloon.
Mhm.
And then when it opened up, the line that was on the inside said, I think we both know what's missing. And then it said Jim Krueger, copywriter.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
so
good.
I did a bunch of those. Like, there was even one that said, in the last 6 months, I've witnessed a beating, found homeless people living in my basement, and have been held at gunpoint. And then it opened up and said, I think I'm ready for New York, Jim Krueger, copywriter. And so I did all these things. And then, you know, from the point of mailing the first one to ultimately working and living in New York City, it was 3 months.
Wow, that's amazing. And using
Yeah,
those skills to get yourself in there.
it was so lucky, and everyone I met was so kind, and just really fortunate.
Great, great. Um, so I'm not really sure where this fits in the timeline, but at some point, so you wrote, you directed, and you produced a short film called "They Might Be Dragons."
Oh yeah, thanks. You should, if you want to show that movie on here, you should. Like it's only 7 minutes. If you want to interrupt this, for the movie. So what had happened is this was after I did Foot Soldiers, which was first published by Dark Horse. And in the midst of that, I met a guy in the back of a bus headed to Montclair, New Jersey, and I was showing him, my early Foot Soldiers work and the sketches and the idea, and he said, "Well, I might want to show this to my partner. We produce movies." And I said, anything I would know? And he said, "Yeah, the last Batman movie," and it turned out to be Michael Uslan,
Oh wow.
who lived in the same town in Jersey that I lived in and just didn't even know. And so he optioned it. And then when his option ran out, he was trying. I forget how he needed more time on the option, but he said he ultimately came back to me and said, "Look, I don't want to pay for another year's option, but if you give me one more year, I think you've got it in you to write films. So I'll teach you and train you how to write a film." So Michael Uslan was really my first teacher how to write screenplays and how to write film and all that sort of thing. And he got me started. And it was the summer after Earth X was over and just before I was writing Universe X that I felt like, you know what, I need to know more about this and stuff like that. So I started going to NYU and entered their director's program and made this movie, They Might Be Dragons.
That's amazing. And you can't do much better than Michael Uslan,
Oh my God.
who has so much experience with Batman. That's pretty amazing. So yeah, when you started showing it to NYU, you won Best in Class among several other awards for that short film.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's good. It's a special movie for sure.
And you wrote a story script for the game Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks.
I did.
Am I bringing up all the obscure pieces of your work?
Well, yes and no, but there's so many people I meet who are like, "Oh, that was my favorite game. That was my favorite game." And what was so awesome working with the Midway people is they really wanted it to, like, they were looking at what Earth X was and how it was really the secret origin beneath all the other secret origins, and it was really telling the story that connected like all the MacGuffins and revealed all the MacGuffins for years. And so the goal of Shaolin Monks was to create a game that ultimately told the story of the first two games and kind of even the first two movies put together. And it was really fun. Um, there was actually a lot of writing to it. It wasn't just like ugh and ugh and oof, as people were getting sliced and diced.
Yeah, sure, right. So, have you have any, I guess, thoughts or like, have you wanted to get back into writing for more films or games? I know you do mostly writing for, graphic novels or series.
Well, here's the really funny thing about Hollywood is like so many of those of us who are making our living here are writing on films and TV things that have not been produced
Hmm.
yet. So I would say it's kind of half and half now. Like my career is half and half. Like half of my income is working on screenplays and TV or this thing or that thing, and half of it's graphic novels. So yeah, I'm always working towards that. I'm writing a screenplay right now for some producers out of Nashville, which is based on something not that I experienced, but based on a friend's experience years ago when I was living in John Wayne's apartment in Times Square, New York. I met this guy and he had this amazing story. And I said, if I can ever set that up as a film, will you let me? Because I think it's a real story. I think people would love it. And it fits in the realm of like Shawshank Redemption, that kind of feel, that kind of story. And so it's fun to be doing a true story or a mostly true story, as adaptions often are, as opposed to, you know, here's the Watcher on the moon.
Right. Which undoubtedly has some dark tunnel that you're going through. You come out into your other side where the rays of
Oh,
light are
yeah,
shining through the
totally.
clouds.
Totally. Because those are the
Absolutely.
kind of stories that move me, you know?
So you were recently on Kevin Smith's his podcast called Fat Man Beyond. And on that show, you said that you had a chance to present to Avi Arad.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I
Yeah.
was at Marvel, one of the things that came down was I think one. Let me step back. I think one of the reasons why I was hired at Marvel in their department, and I worked under amazing people, like the head of advertising was like one of the former writers on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. He like wrote amazing ads. Like he was classic madman. Like he was like the line, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. That was his. He created Frankenberry and Blueberry cereal,
Okay.
like all that stuff was his. And so he was so smart. And the art director that was the creative director that worked with him was also this giant madman from that era. And so it was like these classic advertising guys. Anyhow, I came in not only having a good portfolio that showed that I could write advertising and be a copywriter, but I also knew Marvel lore. I also knew the characters. I knew the product in that kind of way. So when they, as heads of marketing, would be brought on a project or brought in on something that wasn't just advertising, they would come to me and do this. And so yeah, they ultimately had me put together a presentation to Avi when Marvel Studios hadn't even existed yet about where Marvel should go, and it was all Avengers based. I pitched them all Avengers stuff, Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man. I was like, this is the stuff that one, Marvel still has the rights to do something with.
Mhm.
And then
Because the X-Men were still
these are
with the
like,
Fox.
yeah, these are the iconic things, and these are also things that don't take a giant leap of faith to believe on the screen. Like Captain America doesn't take a giant leap of faith.
Right.
Iron Man doesn't even take a giant leap of faith. It's Rocketeer in present day.
Oh, pretty science-based.
Yeah, yeah. So
Incredible.
yeah,
Well,
so again, a little footnote in the secret origin
mhm.
of the MCU, I guess.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would have never known that if you hadn't said anything. Like I said, you get, as a writer, I guess you get to work on a lot of projects and not really get credit for a lot of them. That's what gets done.
Oh, for
But it's,
sure.
but it's integral to what the overall product is, which is amazing. So where you were in the origin of this, how do you feel about like where the MCU has become now compared to what your expectations were back then?
You know what? I this is true about my entire career. I think like I never had expectations. Like I didn't expect to really win awards in advertising. I didn't expect that to turn into an advertising gig at Marvel. I didn't expect that I would get to write comics, let alone have this ongoing working relationship with someone like Alex Ross.
Sure.
I didn't expect to now know so many people in the industry and call them friends. I didn't expect to meet someone in the back of a bus who would then teach me how to write film. Like all these things seem somewhat accidental. I mean, it's like once I had a glimmer of, oh wait, I could do this, or oh, this is possible, I went for it. But it was more like I at no point has my career been built on, oh, this was my dream and I went for it and blah blah blah. It was like, oh wait, I can do this. So
Yeah, it's more about seeing an opportunity and going for it.
yeah, and probably not thinking enough of myself, you know, along the way to really think, oh, wait, this is possible.
Right, right. And so with that, do you ever like question some of your work, even that you're published? I mean, you're an artist, so obviously anything you put out there, you probably have like you're questioning some of it. You're not, this is never just a finished product, right?
Right. I mean, there are things that, I think, I look back on Earth X and I'm like, wow, that was lucky. It was more like when and this is not a comparison at all. This is
Mhm.
not a comparison at all. So for anyone who wants to beat me up for this, I'm not comparing this. But you know how Tolkien talks about how he didn't write Lord of the Rings. He kind of discovered it.
Mhm.
That was my feeling in Earth X. It was like Alan Moore has this great thing where he talks about how research is about finding connections between things that you didn't know were connected. And I would say Earth X was like that. Like Universe X and Paradise X, it was more like we were kids in a candy store and we were like, okay, how can we tie every single thing together?
Mhm.
Blah, 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 blah. And they're good, they're great, but Earth X was the thing that was really special. And the recent Marvel's X that just came out, that little 6 issue story that Alex and I did with artist Welby, uh, I'm so proud of that thing too. I mean, like I love how that sets up and leads into Earth X, and the real trick with that was that even though Earth X was written 20 years ago, like at the beginning of my career, really, I didn't write that in any way to wreck any of the reveals that happen in Earth X. And so that was the trick. How can I set up something to then be revealed later without doing anything, without like wrecking the experience of reading Earth X?
Right. And Marvel's X is just recently published and
Yep.
came out with the latter part of last year and is meant to be a prequel to Earth X. So a story that came out over 20 years ago, and now you're writing the prequel to it. So what is the change there? I know you've got so much more experience since it's 20 years that you've released Earth X. So how is it different now?
It's really funny. Like in some ways, I'll read stuff and I'll be like, "Oh, I'm such a better writer now."
Mhm.
But then I'll look at stuff and I'll be like, "No, that was really great. Could I have come up with that now? Would I have come up with that now?" I mean, like like when I was writing that, I was still so influenced by Alan Moore, by everything that was happening and all the wordsmithery that was going on, at the time. But that was before Warren Ellis got rid of thought balloons and even caption boxes and tried to make it so that comics could be read in 2 minutes, you know? And Marvel's X is probably somewhere in between, because I definitely, when people read a comic of mine, I definitely want it to take more than 2 minutes to get through or 3 minutes to get through. I definitely want people to feel like they've gone into something, and this isn't this comics. Comics, I feel like, are somewhere between film and prose.
Mhm.
So if we're not entering a person's head, if we're not entering into some sort of singular experience and interpretation of the world, we lose the prose aspect of comics. And, it shouldn't just be still images with a word balloon, because that's like cheap film. That doesn't even embrace
Sure.
the thing that comic books are unto themselves as an art form.
I definitely see that. And Earth X is not a light read.
No.
It is not a light read.
And lots of
Um,
storms and lots of tunnels and
yeah, sure, sure. Lots of tunnels, lots of sun shining through. As a copywriter, you've written for everything from, like it was talked about, the Got Milk, the different advertising that you did before, to landmark titles for two of the largest comic publishers in the world. So, how would you explain the importance of writing, whether it be for marketing or for original IP or whatever it is?
well, I would say that no matter what you're doing, you're telling a story.
Mhm.
Like with advertising, you're given 7 words, 11 words, in a headline, and that's it. So the importance is no matter what you're writing for, whether you're writing actual stories or you're writing ads, you're always a storyteller. I had one of my early advertising gurus that I paid a lot of attention to. He said, the key to advertising is you have to speak truth about a product in the most surprising way possible.
Hmm.
And that was really interesting because, I mean, I grew up being like, oh, advertising is lying. Advertising is just making you think you need something that you don't need versus, okay, what's the thing about this thing that's so important that we need to be reminded of it all the time, or we need to be reminded again in our daily experience why this thing is so important. And, the same applies to superheroes, the same applies to mega IP or even minor IP. It's like, if I'm going to write a Superman story or a Spider-Man story or a Thor story, it's like what I need to say is what's the thing about this character, even in this issue, that makes them vital, that makes me that reminds me why this character is so important, why this character is worth however much money I spend for this issue. And I need, especially in serialized comics, we need to be reminded that every single issue, or the comic fails.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And same thing with like, what about this character makes it worth the amount of money that I'm paying to read this comic, or even if it's a product, like you said, if we have to constantly be reminded of why we need it, and then it's not just marketing trying to pull the wool over our eyes just so that we'll give them money, right?
Right.
Um, that's pretty amazing.
Even household cleansers, you'll get
Sure.
an ad for a household cleanser that'll say, pretty much so they all clean, but this one smells better than the others. And if that's true, then it's like, yeah, if I'm going to clean, I kind of like the place to smell nice too.
Right.
You know? So
Exactly.
it's dumb, but it's fun, and
I
it
think
is
that's
very,
extremely helpful for anybody that's trying to write for a product or it's been hired as a copywriter for another company, to be able to focus on something that's a truth rather than to hype something up to be something that it's not, or something
yeah.
that you don't
There's
actually
a
need.
there's a rule that a director gave me years ago, and he said, because we were talking about comics and film and TV, and
Mhm.
this is one of my maybe top 10 writing rules for anything that has a story that continues. He's like, you have to advance the story no matter what, and you have to remind people of why they love it in the first place.
That's a
And
great
so
way
if
of
you
putting it.
don't do that, if you don't do that, then people read that comic, they're like, huh. Like I really love, was it Nick Spencer who wrote the whole Secret Empire thing and Cap is a Hydra agent?
Oh, I believe so. Yes.
Okay, so I love that storyline, but so many people hated it because they didn't want to see Hydra agent Cap. They didn't want to see Nazi Cap. They really didn't. And I
Right.
think at the time, if Marvel had told that story while also having a different Captain America comic of the past that showed classic Cap stories or something
Hmm.
like that, people would have embraced this storyline a lot quicker, a lot more. And that was a time in which we had a different character as Thor, or a different character as Iron Man, a different like Marvel had all these different characters, and so the thing that people wanted from books they couldn't get because of the experimentation, which is always good that Marvel was doing. But at the same time, we wanted our Tony Stark Iron Man.
Right.
We wanted
Right.
our Steve Rogers Cap. We wanted, so
Well, that's an interesting take. So if we had Secret Empire running at the same time, concurrently with maybe like an Invaders, comic run at the same time. So
right.
we're getting both sides of the ultra good Cap to the ultra evil Cap, and I don't know. That's good contrast, I guess. Knowing
Yeah.
that you want to see Cap do good, you
Yeah.
want the Steve Rogers as the hero, not the villain,
Yeah.
and so no, that's amazing. It's good perspective. At one point, Wizard magazine was a thing,
Yeah, it was. It
and
totally was.
yeah, it used to be huge, right? Everybody read it.
I love Wizard magazine. I loved it. Yeah.
Right, right. Same here. Yes, that definitely collected those back when we had print magazines that were so common. But they named you in the top 10 writers in the comics industry and an innovator of the field. So does praise like that humble you, or does it make you feel like you can stop questioning your work as much?
No, it has the opposite effect. It really does. It's so I guess it's humbling, but I kind of like look, I can go online and I can read plenty of people attack me or say this sucks or it stinks or I don't like this and stuff like that. So when the good stuff comes, it's like, oh good. People like this. So it's kind of like the praise isn't so high, but the hate isn't so low. It's kind of like I can take the hate and I can be like, that's your opinion. It's a bad opinion, but that's your opinion, you know. And the praise can be like, oh, that's really nice. We'll see if I make the top 10 writers list next month. It's like that.
For sure. So what's up next for you? Well, I know you've got so much in your portfolio now. That portfolio that you first hit Marvel has grown exponentially. And so, what's on the table right now? I know you said you're writing a script.
Well, I'm writing this movie, and there's another movie I wrote a while ago that some people were really excited about potentially producing. And that's more of a horror, supernatural thriller kind
Mhm.
of thing, but really funny, really odd. Um, and so I've got those two movies. There's some other stuff I can't announce yet, but I'm working with the artist Hebrew, the street artist Hebrew, who has like all this cool fashion, all this art and stuff like that. He and I think this is the first time I'm even talking about this. He and I have been working on a new graphic novel, which is like classic action adventure. I'm not even going to say what it is. I'm not even like I can't even say what the title is, but a new artist that I never worked with before, but who I'm so excited about working with, and I know I'll work with again. He's um, he's drawing it, and it looks amazing. Like this thing will be awesome and funny. Like it's really funny. I
Great. Well,
can't
we
wait to
really,
tell more of the story. Like
yeah, I can't wait to hear more about it and to look
like
forward to that.
it's ridiculous, and there's some moments that are like laugh out loud funny, and
Hmm.
I've been dieting and putting all this all these conversations I've been hearing based on food and how it affects us physically and stuff like that. I'm throwing that stuff in here, and it's just it's it'll be awesome when it comes out. Like there's
Amazing.
nothing we've seen. There's no film that's been like this. There's no comic that's like this. And it's my like it's also between Hebrew and I, it's our love for the action movies of the 80s and 90s. It's our love for Die Hard, it's our love for it's my love for anything Shane Black has ever written.
Okay. Okay. That's great. And so, if we wanted to keep up with the news on that, would we follow you on your social media accounts or?
Yeah, I would really do. I mean, I have a Twitter account that's the same as my Instagram, but it's just I
Mhm.
am Jim Krueger. That's it. Like I'm Jim Krueger. I am JimKrueger, and that's me on Instagram, which is where I'm probably the most often, and so and new stuff I can show. Like it was just my birthday, and I got to show uh, the biggest gift of my birthday this year, even though my wife went overboard and got me all these Craig Yo book hardcovers from IDW that I didn't have. And I love that stuff. And what was really funny is the week before, Craig and I started talking, and then these books arrived, and I was like, oh my gosh. Um, but the biggest gift I probably got for my birthday was Alex Ross sent me his design for Spider-Man, for Marvel's X and Paradise X and stuff like that. And we've been talking about this for 20, 25 years. Oh no, not 25 because Earth X is just over 20. So we'll say like 15 years, 16 years. I'm Spider-Man in the Paradise X Earth X realm. And so he took some headshots of me a number of years ago. And so he sent me a piece. He sent me that piece of art. In fact, I can probably, if I have it handy, no, I don't, but it's on my Instagram. So that's a reason to go there now.
Definitely check out the Instagram. For those of you that don't know, Alex Ross is a very hugely prolific artist in comics, of course. And he typically uses models, real life models, in order to get the dimensions right on all the characters and his designs right, from the costumes to the design of the people. And so you got to stand in for Spider-Man for Marvels.
Yeah, no, it was amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So now my joke is that I get to add male model to my my portfolio.
Yeah, you just crossed over into all of the industries, didn't
you? That's right. That's right.
Jim, do you have?
Oh, going to stay away from politics.
Yes, let's just stay clear of that one. Absolutely.
This is a bad time.
We've seen what happens there. Jim, do you have any words of advice to anyone who's hoping to break into writing, whether it be copywriting or just working for someone else doing writing?
Totally. There's so many things I could say. The first thing I would say is take a note from Born Again, Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Born Again. And I read that thing, and there's one phrase that's repeated through the entire thing, and that's never give up, never give up, never give up. And that's really the key. I mean, you never give up. You keep on writing. And, when you read Stephen King's book on writing, that's the same thing. He's like, if you're going to write every day. And I don't always do this, but I would say 80 to 90% of the time, my day has three things that have to happen, in addition to things like eating and sleeping and, those sorts of things. But I have to read something every day, I have to write something every day, and I have to watch something every day.
Wow.
And I would say, do that. Don't just the idea of writing is that what you read and what you watch, you have to put somewhere. You can't just take in, you have to put out. And so, you do that. I would also say, find people who will give you great notes. And here's how you tell great notes from bad notes. I mean, look, part of the whole note process is learning how to take criticism. And I've had plenty of people that I've mentored over the years who, if I'll read their screenplay, I'll be like, so this really didn't work. And they'll be like, oh, you just don't understand. This is what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, it's not in the script. It doesn't matter. Your explanation to me doesn't matter. It's not there. So don't treat me like I'm ignorant. It's not in your script. And so you have to do something to make sure it is, because maybe the idea that they have is a really good idea, or the motivation is a good idea. So here's how you tell good notes from bad notes. And I would say this was vital for me to learn. A bad note is when someone tells you what they would do instead. When they say, oh, I think it should be this. What they begin to do is they begin to tell you their version of the story, which is just going to confuse you, because you have a version of the story you want to tell. And if you start taking in other people's influences, then you start writing for them and their vision instead of being true to your own. So that's a bad note. A good note is when someone recognizes the story you can tell, or that you're wanting to tell, and they give you a note that says, this isn't working to tell the story you want to tell. They enter the story enough that they're able to give you something that's going to help you get to the story you want to tell. There's this great old, I really love film. I really love old film. There's this great old movie with George C. Scott in it called They Might Be Giants, in which, and it gets kind of ridiculous by the end, but man, that first half hour is like gold. It's perfect. And it's George C. Scott plays a judge who, when his wife died, has a mental breakdown and now thinks he's Sherlock Holmes. And everyone's trying to get his money and put him in a psych ward, and he's put into a psych ward where ultimately he's helping cure other patients and stuff like that. And everyone's amazed. And then guards try to attack him and put a straitjacket on him, but he flips them over and stuff like that. It's this ridiculous, crazy man who's saner than anyone. And when a new psychiatrist is put on his program, he wants nothing to do with her until he finds out that her last name is Watson, and turns into this like beautiful, strange love story between the two. And as he's going off, and they're going off looking for Moriarty, they're on a rooftop in New York looking for clues and stuff like that. And they find this old couple who have this rooftop garden, and they just accept that he's Mr. Holmes, and they say, Mr. Holmes, would you please give us the great honor of criticizing our rooftop gardening? Like, they even use that word criticizing, and we normally look at that word as it's so bad, it's so awful.
Right. Negative connotation.
Because of who he is, because they recognize what he'll be able to bring to them, they invite his critique. And if we're going to be writers of worth, we need to invite critique, like real critique. But it has to be, we have to be careful whose voices we listen to and whose critique we take seriously, because it's so easy to get off track. Because part of writing is getting to know yourself better and knowing your own passions better and knowing what are the things that move you and all that sort of thing. When I do classes, I always start with asking the question, if we're writers, we all have all these ideas. We have this, we want to tell this story or this story or this story or this story. As writers, it's not just one thing we want to tell, it's all of them. And how do we decide one from the other? And really, I start by saying it's in the power of the word no. When you look out at the world and you see things, what are the things we say no to? What are the things we say that's wrong to? What are the things we say, if only I could change that, I would. And then we tell a story about that no, because us saying no reveals what our passions are. And sometimes it's just passion alone that leads us to even finish a script or finish a story or any of that kind of thing.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm glad I asked that. You just unleashed a whole TED Talk wealth of information for everybody there. That's amazing.
Sorry about that. Apologies, everyone.
No, that's great. No, I'm so happy I asked that. Yeah, so if you're in your own bubble and you're creating something, you can be passionate about it. You have an idea where it's going, but unless you show it to somebody that you trust to give you critique on it, you may just skip right to releasing it, and then it fall flat on its face because you didn't have anybody help you.
Totally. Or it doesn't even fall flat. It's just pretty good when it could be amazing. Right. I mean, it's not always like that note is the difference between, like utter failure or utter success. It's more like, oh, if that moment had just been different, it could have been better. Like, and I said this on the Kevin Smith show, but it's like one of my favorite examples. In Earth X, there's a point where the editor told me that Reed Richards couldn't wear Xavier's helmet, that would help Xavier, locate mutants and stuff like that. And they said it was only designed for Xavier's mind, and so it's not going to work for Reed. And so that led, because of that that led to Reed, like me coming up with Reed looking at a schematic of Xavier's form of his brain. And so Reed was able to configure and shape his brain to look like Xavier so the helmet would work, which led to even the Thing making a joke about Reed stretching his brain and, all that kind of thing. And then that was reported even in Wizard magazine, going back to Wizard, as one of their favorite moments from the series. And it was just this small little thing that people loved. And so, again, thank God for editors. Like even with Marvel's X, this last thing, Tom Brevoort made it so much better. Just by asking questions, just by saying this doesn't quite work, or he was like, for those who have read it, he was like, you know what, it seems like David needs to do a little bit more in that last issue, which led to this really important moment, without giving anything away, where David has to get Cap his shield. And David has loved Cap the entire time. David has wanted to be Cap's partner the entire time. David has wanted to be saved by the heroes the entire time. And it all leads to this moment. And, that's why the right people can make our projects better, and we have to seek them out. And if we're just seeking praise, we're missing an important beat in our own stories as writers.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. That was incredible. And I think so helpful to so many people who are trying to create a career for themselves. I know when you started back in the 90s, it looks very different than what it does now, with, mostly social media. And of course, with the past year that we've had, keeping most people indoors, not really able to get out there, show their portfolio in person. They weren't able to just fly over to New York and pick it up, themselves. The landscape has changed, but the writing process, I would say, is probably pretty much the same. So if you have good advice like what you just gave, then it sets you on a track to success.
Totally. Yeah. And however we succeed is however we succeed. Whether we get to do comics or film or prose. Like, I've been writing short stories. I've been doing prose lately too, and so there will be more prose stuff coming, and I'm excited about all that. It's fun, and writing screenplays, writing pilots, writing comic books, writing short stories. Each area helps all the other areas too. And so, in the same way I said, as part of my origin, as part of my story of sharing, it's not just about, it's not just about, like, I didn't have that dream that I was going after, but what I always was open. And that's another important thing as a writer. Be open to what might happen, not necessarily what you're hoping is going to happen.
For sure. Huge part. I would think that with any kind of industry you're trying to break into, probably the same, the same mindset needs to be there. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for being on the show with us. And everybody follow Jim on Instagram. You can get news about the film that's coming up or any kind of upcoming projects. Marvel's X was just released through Marvel Publishing. I'm sure you can pick it up at any of your comic shops or Amazon. Even one of your other books that can only be bought from you or Amazon. What is the one with the fairy tale?
Oh yeah, I have this fairy tale book that is like, it's a dark fairy tale. It's the heroic journey of the damsel in distress. It's called The High Cost of Happily Ever After.
Yes.
And again, I just love it so much. There's The Runner, which is the story about a guy who's been on the run from the Angel of Death since 1936. And even a project called The No Ones, which is about a team of celebrity superheroes who get cursed to insignificance. So no matter what they do, it'll be forgotten. And if people can't find them in their stores or Amazon, they can direct message me on Instagram, and I'll work something out with them to get them books. But again, we need to support our comic shops.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm looking at Amazon right now, and The High Cost of Happily Ever After only has one copy left in stock right now. So somebody's gonna be the lucky one to get that.
So someone can reach out to me if they want it. It's a really special book.
Amazing. Well, thanks again, Jim. And if you are watching this video and you want to hear the audio form, you can find us on Spotify or anywhere that you get your own podcast. If you are listening to us on the audio version, of course, we will upload it to YouTube, and you can always find us on our website at www.arkansasbusinessengine.com. Jim, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and you've given such a wealth of knowledge to anybody that's trying to break into any kind of industry.
Awesome. Well, thanks. So glad to help and share, and
absolutely. All right, well, until next time, BOP.